I think we'll get started. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Peter Rudd. I'm with the Fiji Trade Commission to New Zealand. We're calling from Auckland today, and we're very pleased to have Carol Watkins calling in from Fiji, beautiful Fiji, and Alan Graham from Mindpearl, who's calling all the way in from outside Cape Town in South Africa. So we appreciate Alan being up late. I think it's about 11 p.m. South African time currently, so we appreciate him coming in and dialing in at this time of the night.
No problem.
And thank you for all the attendees joining us this morning. We really wanted to do this webinar. I think it's a good opportunity to update stakeholders and businesses about the opportunity out of Fiji. Fiji's obviously very COVID contained. I think it's over 200 days now of no cases, doing very well. However, there are challenges. Obviously, the tourism sector is impacted severely by border restrictions. People are lost jobs, resorts have shut, although there are some programs around domestic tourism, which is great to see. And I think there's one thing in this sort of new environment that we're in is it sort of presents an opportunity to recalibrate and look at how you run your business. I was fortunate enough when I first went to Fiji on business, or first went to Suva on business 3 years ago, and we actually got to walk through Mindpearl and some of the other BPO operators up in Suva. And I was amazed that this scale of operation was up there. I mean, you never sort of think of Fiji and think of the ICT or business process outsourcing sector. You always think of tourism. But Fiji is strong and resilient and has diversification into other sectors. So manufacturing is holding up well, and the BPO sector in particular is a shining light in terms of, I guess, where they are now and also looking to the future in scaling up that sector for Fiji. Currently, there's several thousand people employed in the business process outsourcing sector in Fiji, and quite a number of players. So from Mindpearl at the larger scale of around 1,000 staff, quite a number of players with 300 to 400 agents, and then some smaller operators as well. What we've seen in Fiji is, like in the textile industry or manufacturing, the business process sector is also similar in terms of they are nimble. So I think Fiji can offer a solution for New Zealand companies or companies wherever you are in the world in terms of flexibility and a different way of running your business. So I'm going to hand over to Carol now. Carol's the president for the BPO Council of Fiji, which has been in formation over the last sort of 12, 24 months. Has now established a new website, has a number of critical members, key members from Fiji BPO players. And Carol's going to share some insights in terms of how the BPO Council works and the opportunity that we're seeing in this post-COVID environment. And after Carol, we'll move on to Alan. Then we'll have questions and answers. You can submit your questions in the panel, and we'll go through questions at the end of the presentations from both Carol and Alan. So Bula Banaka, thank you, and Carol, I'll hand over to you.
Carol, I think you're on mute.
Carol, can you just unmute yourself, please?
Peter, I'm sorry, we've just had the fire alarm go off in our office. Can I just ask that Alan take the lead, and then I will join in after his presentation?
No problem.
That's absolutely fine, Carol, no problem. You definitely need to go and sort that fire alarm. It sounds like much more important. No problem. So let me just quickly switch to share screen. So hopefully you can all see. Peter, if you can possibly just confirm that you can see it.
Yep, that's coming through.
Yep. Okay, great. Okay, so what I would like to do, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. I would like to just take 15, 20 minutes to cover two things to cover: a little bit about the background of Mindpearl and essentially why we are in Fiji, and cover in a bit more detail, and happy to take any questions towards the end. Any questions around some of the challenges, some of the successes, and most recently and most topical is how we have managed to navigate through the COVID situation and how that's affected our operations in Fiji. So let me just kick off by giving you a little bit of background to put things into perspective. So Mindpearl have been around for just over 20 years. And we started life in 1999. Our background was in the travel sector. And in fact, we were back then owned by a number of European airlines. And Mindpearl were essentially created as a captive contact center to handle the whole gamut of inquiries, from sales inquiries to customer loyalty for those airlines. We had a good run for a couple of years, and then in 2001 we had a bankruptcy of one of the leading companies, the parent companies. We then had to change our operations. We had to start looking at outsourcing. So in 2003, and between 2002, in fact, and 2005, we started looking for outsourced business. And we had limited success on that because of our background in purely travel. And then secondly, we by then had been acquired by another airline. So we struggled for a few years, and then we had an opportunity in 2005-06, and we did a management buyout. And since then, the company's been independently owned. So we started growing again, and a major milestone for us was in 2009 when we opened Fiji. We'd started looking at Fiji as a location a good couple of years before that, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment. And we steadily grew. We opened a couple of new facilities in 2016-17 in Germany, and then Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and then in 2018 we opened a facility last year, 2019, we opened in Lima in Peru. So we ended our 20-year anniversary with a footprint of 5 locations and somewhere in the region of just over 2,000 staff. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Fiji now, and specifically how it fits Mindpearl's solution approach. Most of Mindpearl's clients are multilingual. And they are mainly supported, or mostly supported, through a multiple site arrangement. And the strategic locations that we have, which I'll show you in a moment, they fit that approach. So single market, multi-market, multilingual. Most of our clients require 24/7, so it's very much not a 9-to-5 normal business hours operation. They're all looking for very much for the disaster recovery elements, for the resilience elements, and we have managed to achieve that in each of our locations. So if we look at the right hand side of this slide, then all those elements, I can safely say that all of the locations tick the boxes for all those requirements, including Fiji. So just very quickly, that shows you our global footprint. As you can see from this, all of our locations are multilingual, including Fiji. And the interesting point there is that Fiji, when we opened, was intended to be a unilingual or an English-only location. But over the years, and we opened in 2009 in Fiji, so we're in our 11th year in Fiji. Over the years, we've added languages. And one reason is that some of our European-based clients, for example, they have a requirement for those native languages, be it Dutch, French, German, etc. But they want the 24/7 coverage, but the volumes are quite low. So rather than pay a European-based employee and run a European-based site on an overnight basis, then it made sense for us, it made sense for our clients to introduce linguists into our Suva operation in Fiji. And today we have about 10% of our workforce in Fiji who are linguists. Specifically with Fiji, as I said, it ticks all the boxes. It has the infrastructure through the Southern Cross fiber network, and it had that in place already when we looked and started operations in 2009. Because of the education system, then English is spoken widely in Fiji. It's very natural English, and it's available in terms of the customer service elements and the customer service culture. Because if we look at a lot of the other employers in Fiji, it's driven by tourism, and we have a lot of employees who have come from the tourist sector or come from the customer service sector, and that translates very well into the contact center environment. In terms of location, it's easily accessible, particularly from the Australia and New Zealand region, with about a 4-hour flight from Auckland, and the same for the main East Coast Australian cities. It is very cost efficient. Today we hear a lot about the Philippines, we hear a lot about India. I have a slide in a few moments which shows you a cost illustration. And very importantly, and I think one of the reasons we've been successful, very successful in Fiji, is that it is seen as a career option. If I look at, and as some of you can probably tell from my accent, although I'm sitting in South Africa talking to you today, I'm not South African. I am Scottish, and obviously from that European background, the contact center is not necessarily seen as a long-term career option. When we went to Fiji in 2009 and started operations, it was still very new, and we have, over the last 10 years, seen employees come in at an agent level who have learned, who have trained, who have developed, and we now have native Fijians who are essentially running our business in Fiji. It's our largest operation, so it's very key to us in our global footprint with 1,000-odd staff. So our heads of department in terms of general management, HR, finance, etc. These are people that have actually worked their way through and developed in the company. So it's very much seen as a career option in Fiji, and not, as I've used that term there, a stopgap. I think where we're different as a company and where Fiji's different is the people and the way we treat people. Fiji, I think, had a catchphrase for their national tourist board for a while, you know, the world's friendliest people. And it's very true. And for those of you who have visited Fiji, you know, there's a real warmth and friendliness about the Fijian people. And again, that translates very well in the contact center environment in terms of customer service. So we try and treat people well. We put a lot of effort and time into training to motivate people. We want to keep attrition low. Anyone in the contact center business knows that one of the highest cost elements is of course the people. So we have a global attrition target of no more than 25%, and our location in Suva, Fiji, definitely comes within that parameter. So I'm not going to talk too much about Mindpearl, because obviously we're focusing on Fiji, but it has been successful for us for a bunch of those reasons that I've mentioned. And I wanted to just highlight a couple of things. In this slide, if you look at the left-hand side, the top picture, which is our operations center, some people might say it looks a bit like an airport departures board or some sort of nerve center. And in fact, those screens are showing us queues and workload and workflows from around the globe. So it's very much not what we are handling in the Fiji operation, but it's those clients that are being handled through a combination of different centers, because the workforce management is actually handled in Fiji. So Fiji is actually the center of the globe as far as that element of our business is concerned. Underneath that picture, you see just a shot of our center, which is, as I say, now been there for 11 years now. And maybe one of the more interesting pictures is on the right, the Hong Kong Sevens. So going back to the point that I made, we do want to motivate people. We want to keep people with us. We do run incentives on a regular basis. And unfortunately, 2020 has been different for a number of reasons, which I won't go into. But last year, we ran an incentive and we sent 40, I think it was about 45 people to the Hong Kong Sevens last year. And I'm very pleased to say that Fiji won that competition. So it was a great trip, and those employees really had a trip to remember for the rest of their lives, I think. So moving on to COVID, so I'll bring us back down to earth now. So we've had, on a global basis, a challenging time like any business has. In Fiji, I think it's fair to say that when we use words like lockdown and curfews and restrictions, then in comparison to many other parts of the globe, I think it's fair to say that Fiji, it's been minimal. So, for example, you know, there was a lockdown. I believe there is still a curfew in place, but it was much more short-lived than it has been in other countries. Partly because, yeah, Fiji is an island. Population, you know, we're not speaking the tens of millions, and there's a different way of life in Fiji. I think we were fortunate for those reasons. We were fortunate because Fiji acted very quickly in terms of closing borders and containing the situation. In terms of operating the business, then because a lot of the work we do was essentially seen as a necessary service, we were one of those organizations that was allowed to continue operations via an essential services permit. One thing that we do in Fiji is that we actually operate our own fleet of buses to ensure that staff are getting to and from work safely. One reason for that is that we operate 24 hours. The public transport is not always available 24 hours, so that's something that we put in place from day one. So that allowed us to continue. Of course, there were concerns medically from the point of view of the COVID pandemic, and I think at its peak in Fiji, we had about 25% of our staff who were working from home. So we didn't lose any, we didn't have a shutdown as such, and we were also fortunate because I mentioned earlier, a number of the clients we support in Fiji are supported elsewhere in the world. So that allows us to manage spikes and to manage the workload over a 24-hour period. And that was something that we certainly did, not just from the point of view of Fiji, but the point of view of every location at the height of the pandemic. So I think one thing that COVID has presented in terms of an ongoing challenge is actually growing the business because of border closures. Any aspect of development of your business has really been done via Zoom, via virtual meetings. So right now, the border closures have unfortunately stopped that, but as we all hope, then that will change moving into 2021. So those were some of the challenges we had with COVID. We did have them in Fiji. Fiji was not immune to it, but I think we were fortunate for those reasons that I have mentioned. Just a couple more slides, and this one talks about the factors influencing investments. I think the landscape for the business investor today is very different in 2020 to the one that presented itself to Mindpearl in 2008. There's a very simple table there, which I think is self-explanatory. But if I look at the positives were that, again, I mentioned in the first couple of slides, Fiji had the Southern Cross fiber network in place. So that was a given. The technology aspect was there, the communication aspect was there, the competitiveness was there. And because of historical links or whichever term you would like to use, and the affinity with cultures such as the British, such as the Australian and the New Zealanders, then there was a culture fit there. And the Fiji accent is very, very well accepted across the globe. So those were all the positives. I think one of the negatives was actually explaining to the government at that point in time. And remember, I'm talking 11, 12 years ago now when we started those discussions. BPO wasn't really established in Fiji. It's a very different picture now. And you know, if we compare what we went through then to where we are today, if we were to start those discussions, it's very, very much a night and day situation. For most of our clients, again, I've mentioned we do handle a number of languages, but by far the majority is English. And of course, English being widely available and very naturally spoken in Fiji, and the literacy rate being so high, then that's obviously a big plus. The time difference is minimal for most of the year, and yeah, it's a short flight in relative terms to get from whether it's New Zealand, whether it's Australia. So Fiji in 2020, I think what this slide is saying is that it pretty much ticks all the boxes. And just to finish off, I've mentioned a few times about competitiveness, and please don't take this as figures cast in stone. This is really simply to give an indication of the competitiveness of Fiji. And you know, as a company that operate in a country such as South Africa as well, then you know South Africa is certainly, if we look at the New Zealand stroke Australian operating base, then yes, South Africa is more cost effective, but it's certainly not as cost effective as Fiji. So I've taken just a benchmark now, whether the actual figure is $50 an hour, and this is a fully loaded price. And there's many variations to this price. So again, don't take this to the bank, but it's just really illustrative that in percentage terms, at least, then you can see that Fiji can actually achieve some serious cost savings over some of those established BPO locations. So that, I hope, has given you some background as to Mindpearl and what we are about in terms of a BPO operator. And secondly, and more importantly, for the purpose of this discussion, why Fiji works for us and why it can work for many other organizations. So I will stop the share and hand back to Peter.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. Really insightful. And we had a few comments on those photos, so I think everyone enjoyed seeing that, particularly the team up at the Fiji Sevens. That was a very generous offer from my.
Had a fantastic time, yes. Yeah.
It was amazing too, the touching on the bus network. So I've seen, so Alan mentioned that to everyone, that Mindpearl have their own bus network, which I think they outsource, or they used to have it in-house, but I think they outsource it these days. Alan might be able to correct me.
Correct, yeah, yes, you're right, yes.
Just because, you know, the challenges, or sometimes challenges of getting around Suva with traffic and roading and everything, it just allows people to be picked up and brought to work, which is fantastic. So we're getting a few questions coming through. By the way, we will be sharing the slides. We'll email those out to you later today at the conclusion of the webinar. And keep the questions coming. We'll go through those at the end. I'm just going to hand over to Carol now. She's back after her fire alarm. She was following a good due process there, health and safety, which is a thumbs up for Carol. So Carol's the president of the BPO Council of Fiji. So Carol, if you'd like to unmute, and I'll let you go through your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you to everyone joining the call today. Thank you for giving up your time. just gonna share my screen now. We're gonna start off by looking at the benefits of outsourcing to Fiji, most of the points were covered by Alan, but if I could just summarize as well. Many Australians and New Zealanders are familiar with Fiji as a dream holiday destination. What most don't know is that when they contact big brands like ANZ, DHL, Vodafone, and others, they could well be talking to someone from Fiji. First of all, one of the key benefits of outsourcing to Fiji is proximity. Not just in time zone, where there is generally a 1 to 2 hour time difference between Fiji and New Zealand, depending on daylight savings, but also in terms of distance. It's not very far to fly to Fiji from New Zealand. You're looking at between 3 to 4 hours, depending on where you fly out from. Prior to COVID, you could easily fly into Fiji for a meeting in the morning and be back at home for dinner in the evening. There's also the cultural proximity, being close neighbors and also being part of the Commonwealth. This cultural connectivity is important. Many New Zealanders have been to Fiji, and so not only do New Zealanders understand the Fijians, but it's also vice versa as well. And there's also English. English is the official language in Fiji. Our children are taught English in our schools, and everyone speaks it. Fijians have a pretty neutral accent, if you want to perhaps use that term to compare it to other locations. And also, with many New Zealanders traveling to Fiji for holidays, most are aware of the strong service culture of the Fijians. It's not just tourism. It blends quite well into the business world, and there's also a strong positive behind what attracts businesses to outsource to Fiji. The Fijian government provides free education for children attending schools, and as a result, Fiji has a very high literacy rate of approximately 96%. Fiji has also a highly educated workforce, with most people having a tertiary qualification. There's approximately close to 5,000 people coming out of the tertiary institutions every year with certificates, diplomas, and degrees. So that covers the majority of the selling points, Fiji's selling proposition. There's also others which we will touch on briefly as I go through the slides. The next slide was based on case studies that have recently been done comparing Fiji to the Philippines, and this has been based on companies that used to outsource to the Philippines and are now outsourcing to Fiji. And first and foremost, one of the main reasons why they chose to come to Fiji was the proximity, people, and the environment. So basically, Fiji is a whole lot closer, and they can take their family on work trips to Fiji. They didn't feel that it was safe to take their family on work trips to the Philippines. And there's a lot that people can do in Fiji when coming in for a holiday. We're world famous for our friendly people and our natural beauty. There was also the traffic and pollution issues that were raised. The second point was the fact that Fiji was very cost competitive. Generally, we're looking at New Zealand $10 to $15 per hour, depending on the service that's being outsourced. Staff turnover was a major reason as well. It's significantly lower in Fiji. What they experienced in the Philippines was that staff were being poached every week because one of the cases quoted a bounty of 500 that was being offered. So it was difficult to build a team and a culture in the Philippines. Communication, better interaction with staff, even when their staff were visiting Fiji, the Fijians with their hospitality would take their people out to dinner in their homes, and they just found it easier to communicate with the Fijian people. There was also the voice quality, great voice quality with the neutral accent. And also the alignment to Australia and New Zealand, which we talked about before, which, the proximity exchange of visitors, or the game of rugby. We share more cultural touch points with Australian and New Zealanders than they do with the Philippines. And then there was also the reliable infrastructure. Alan talked about the Southern Cross cable. And also, it was tested during the height of the pandemic, and contact centers in Fiji continued to operate with agents working from both home and the offices with no issues with regards to connectivity, etc. Moving on to the next slide. This is just looking at the current landscape of the industry in Fiji. Alan's company is the biggest company, the largest BPO in Fiji. We have approximately 7 large companies operating in Fiji, with 15 smaller BPOs operating as well. What people don't know is that Fiji has had a long history as a BPO offshore destination, and major brands have been basing their own offshore operations on the islands for several decades. For example, from its hub in Suva, the ANZ Pacific operations serves the bank's customers in 11 countries, including Australia and New Zealand. DHL's operations in Fiji provide back office support to the company's Australian and New Zealand operations. And in more recent years, private companies, both local and multinational, have set up operations in Fiji to offer nearshore outsourced services. The first market entrants were for services such as customer care and complaints and data processing, but that has now moved on to specialist services like airline reservations, back office, collections, IT help desk, insurance claims processing, HR services, and a big one is the accounting back office work, including general ledger reconciliations. So generally, there is not a lot of services that you can't outsource to Fiji. Under the plans laid out by the Minister for Commerce and Trade and the BPO Council of Fiji, which was formed in 2018, the country aims to double the number of staff employed in the BPO sector by 2023. We currently have about 5,000 people employed currently. And to make this a reality, the Fijian government is putting in place unprecedented resources and initiatives to encourage both new BPOs and new end user clients to flock to the island. One of the main incentives that was announced in the country's 2019 budget was a tax holiday of 13 years for companies in the industry. And while Fiji currently doesn't have a lot of the 1,000-seat mega contact centers that you will find in India and the Philippines, there are strong signs that it won't be too long before you will see more of these centers available. Certainly, the government has such growth in mind with their long-term planning, and they've leveraged the island's advanced technology infrastructure by creating 2 special ICT development tax-free zones near the cities of Suva and Lautoka. Earlier this week, it was announced also that MDF, which is the Market Development Facility that is funded by the Australian government, is partnering with the developer of the Colombo Business Park to bolster support for the park in Suva. This park will offer state-of-the-art office space for companies in the BPO industry. Our next slide looks at the key focus areas of the BPO Council. The first focus area for the Council is marketing and branding, and the purpose here is to create awareness for Fiji as a BPO destination. The BPO Council has been provided a government grant to assist with creating awareness for Fiji as a BPO destination, and with this grant, we've been able to develop the website and also put resources into digital marketing. The Australian government also through the MDF has provided funding that has enabled the council to have a business development manager on the ground in Australia. And his role is to generate exposure and leads for the council. And the intention of the council is to do the same thing in New Zealand. The next area of focus is compliance and governance. And here we work with regulators to ensure that the laws of Fiji support the growth of the industry and to set standards for the industry in Fiji. The third area of focus, education and training. We're working with the higher education unit in Fiji to add contact center related courses to the tertiary curriculum. And the plan is to have these courses accredited to Australia and New Zealand STEM. Quality standards, that's another area of focus. And here we assist members with an international certification like COPC, etc., that will enforce credibility for the businesses on the world stage. And then there's also infrastructure and technology. Here we work with the providers and government to ensure that we've got availability, reliability, and that infrastructure is affordable. Next slide just looks at a few pictures of various BPOs. And then the last slide, my last slide has the list of the members, companies that are members of the BPO Council of Fiji. So some big names there: NZ, KPMG, Vodafone, DHL, and Digicel, plus a few more. Growing its range of, I'd just like to say that in summary, we all understand the benefits of outsourcing, and the message from the BPO Council is that to companies in New Zealand is that Fiji is well placed to deliver all of the benefits from outsourcing, and with the backing from the BPO Council and government, we stand able to rapidly deploy solutions for new and existing clients. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carol. That was really insightful. So we're going to move on to questions and answers. We've got a few questions here that have popped up, so we'll work through those. I'll just ask the panelists, if you've got any further questions, please submit it on that Q&A tab that should be at the bottom of your screen. We'll endeavour to get through as many as we can. Quite a few are coming through already. Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Alan. That was really insightful. So I'll just go to the first question. Given COVID, with staff working remotely from home, how do you address the needs for clients' data to remain compliant with various privacy regulations around the world, like the EU's GDPR? Is someone able to cover that off?
Yeah, I can cover that from Mindpearl's perspective, and what we did. And what we did was not essentially restricted to Fiji, but I think when it comes to clients and clients' data and regulations around the world, then what we can do is, and what we do is, we ensure that we get the accreditation where we can. And we obviously sign that off with the client. We would have regular audits with clients. For example, you mentioned GDPR, then our European clients would and do come to Fiji on a semi-annual basis at minimum, and they do a GDPR audit on our operation. Now, that audit is in an office environment, okay, and the GDPR is normally in an office environment. When you have a home environment, then there are slight differences, and I'll be honest here, when COVID happened, when lockdowns happened, when restrictions happened, everyone had to adapt. So what we did was we actually sat with the clients and we essentially said what we could offer. Now, we had to ensure continuity of service, and we basically came to an agreement with each client in terms of data security, in terms of GDPR, and it's called different things in different countries, but it was a mutual agreement to allow the business to continue. in Fiji's situation, then I think we managed to accommodate that for every single client. And in Fiji's situation, it was more temporary because the lockdown was rather short-lived in Fiji, thankfully, than it was in other parts of the globe.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. And just on that question, extension of that, I guess around, and Carol mentioned it, the IT. If your agents were working from home, how did that sort of work in terms of their IT setups? Because I'd imagine some people, there's probably various different levels of, in terms of their connectivity.
Yeah, I mean, we worked obviously locally with the telcos to ensure that we had the connectivity available via Wi-Fi dongles and via remote access, and we quickly managed to do that. I think we were fortunate in that at its peak it was only 25% of our total workforce. So again, just reinforcing the point that in Fiji it was limited because we managed to continue operations. Okay, so and we had to compromise, and the clients had to compromise, because I think at the time the world had to compromise with what was going on. It was one day to the next. Governments announced lockdowns, and there were restrictions in place. So it was, in terms of data security, then we still managed to maintain through, and I'm struggling here because I'm not an IT person, so without giving you the correct terminology, we put in place what our clients deemed to be acceptable to continue the operation on a work from home basis, albeit for a temporary period.
Yep. Great, thanks, Alan. Next question, from the industry perspective, can both presenters share a few challenges that may affect potential future investment into the outsourcing sector? So I guess just talking about, what are the sort of challenges that you may face if you're trying to establish or do some outsourcing from Fiji?
Well, one challenge, Peter, if I could just start off, one of the challenges that is being faced by most of the BPOs is, the availability of staff that are contact center ready. And that's one of the key initiatives that the council is working on with the education department for the Fiji government, is to put in courses that are specifically targeted towards contact centers. And the plan is to have these courses available in the tertiary curriculums by the end of next year. And at this stage, we are looking to mirror what the contact center courses that the Australian tertiary institutions have, which is a certificate 2, 3, and 4, and there's also a diploma.
Great. And just on that, I mean, for those that aren't so familiar with Fiji, there's, I think, 3 universities or tertiary institutes up in Fiji, and thousands of graduates coming through. And I think that was touched on earlier was the fact that working in a call center or contact center is actually an aspirational role for a lot of people in Fiji, because rather than moving into agriculture or the tourism sector, obviously the tourism sector is fairly void at the moment. So working in a contact center environment, air conditioning, nice office, talking to international clients all over the world, working with sophisticated software, it's quite a, and I guess also the career trajectory you can go through those organizations. You can start as agent and work up to management level, and then potentially move into other operations globally, really presents an opportunity. I know Skills International are doing a lot of work as well with in Fiji, New Zealand operation, that are working to work and align in terms of that upskilling that Carol sort of touched on there as well.
Yeah, I would just reinforce what you've mentioned, Peter. It's I think also the fact that the contact center industry in Fiji is very much in development. You know, it's got a massive potential. Because of, you know, it's in a way it's an untapped resource, and I think that's one of the key challenges, not just for me as the, you know, the sort of chief commercial officer from Mindpearl, but or any sales or any commercial person. The challenge is to promote Fiji and make people aware of Fiji, because I think in the outsourcing space, it's almost a second nature. When you're having that discussion, people mention the India, the Philippines, or the South Africa. It's simply because they haven't been educated or been made aware of Fiji and the potential Fiji has. So, you know, that's something for all of us to do, is to actually promote. And when we have global brands, as we do, supported from our operations in Fiji, then that helps. It helps the country. It helps the people, because as a contact center agent, you know, if you are taking calls or handling customer service for a global brand, it actually really contributes towards job satisfaction. It's motivational, and essentially we've seen it in 10 years. And you mentioned again the growth of people. It's helping people grow. The industry is seen as a true career for people. So it's an evolving stage, and I think it really is in its infancy. There's so much more we can do with Fiji as a BPO location.
The government certainly want to promote the sector, and you're right, and it's got a history, but it's also got huge potential for growth. Just another question here. This is from Fabian. Thanks for the insightful webinar today. What are the BPO staff's technology capabilities? Is there a good level of experience in areas such as robotic process automation, data analytics, or chatbot development? Of course, chatbots are on everyone's mind at the moment. And so talking about your staff in terms of their IT skill set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think from, you know, speaking from Mindpearl's perspective, we are, you know, Mindpearl are not necessarily a technology BPO. Okay, so we don't put ourselves out there as technology leaders, whereas I know there are a number of BPO players who will have specific technology divisions to their organizations. In terms of the staff, I think the question was specifically at the staff. Then I think the interesting thing, and if I look at Fiji compared with other locations, you know, the staff are young, and the staff are very well educated, and you know, you have that skill set coming through. Whereas in some more traditional locations, certainly that we have, then you don't see the same profile. So, and we will always recruit and we will train people specific towards a client, because I think there's a danger if you put yourself out as a specific sector specialist, then you're potentially closing some doors. So the way that we look at the operation and the staff, and it's very much about the development of the staff in conjunction with the client. So, but to answer the question specifically, we don't have a specific forte in, and I'm speaking about Mindpearl here, in technology. You know, we don't put ourselves as a technology provider. But certainly the skill set is there, and I go back to the point you made, Peter, about, you know, that there's multiple tertiary education institutes in Fiji, and literally they are churning out graduates, as you said, in their thousands. So the talent is definitely in the country. There's no doubt about that.
That's right, and they've all got the latest smartphone, and you know. Yeah. Digicel, Vodafone, the connectivity is there, it's ubiquitous. So
Indeed.
because people always ask me this question from New Zealand, they go, well, what's the technology like? And I go, well, the technology is as good as we've got back home, so it's not an issue. And I was amazed when I worked through Mindpearl too, in terms of business continuity and, resilience around disruption. Obviously, 2020 has presented mass disruption. The occasional cyclone event that comes through, and I was amazed. Mindpearl's built in, generator capacity, on-site restaurant. So if you needed to, and you're in curfew, staff can actually stay on site. And I think there was a case study where a cyclone, I'm not sure, it might have been Winston, in relation to Winston Peters, had come through the Pacific, and Mindpearl or Suva had gone into lockdown for 48 hours, I believe. Mindpearl continued through. Not a single call was dropped, which I thought was an amazing story.
Yeah, no, you're right. And we are genuinely very happy to say that, because some and particularly Winston was quite devastating to various parts of the island, unfortunately. The office and the facility we have has been designed to facilitate all of those things. So yes, we have the canteens, yes, we have the buses to get people to work, and during such a situation, people have just stayed at the office, literally, because when the weather is as it can be, then it's actually a safe place to be. So, and we have invested in the resilience around generation technology, in terms of UPS, in terms of the fuel supply to keep that going for it's at least a 10-day period, and it has been put to the test on more than one occasion in the last 10-11 years. And it's a fantastic thing to say that we have not lost we've not had any downtime. But it's gone.
Sorry, I was just going to say, given what's going on with 2020, is sort of unprecedented, and I guess what we're seeing internationally, India, devastating in terms of COVID. Obviously, strong call center operations up in India and Philippines, for that matter. I know we've seen, our office has seen, the Trade Commission here in New Zealand has seen, for the example of textiles. So there's definitely an over-reliance on China for our textiles coming into New Zealand. So we've seen a lot of inquiries from companies pivoting and wanting to recalibrate and asking us, well, what can Fiji do? And we say, well, actually, they've got some pretty significant clothing manufacturers that could certainly service a lot of your needs. Are we seeing the same thing within the BPO and the contact center world, where companies are recalibrating and thinking, well, maybe we need to look, rather than sending it to the other side of the world, can we go near shore? I mean, Fiji, a 3-hour flight, it's the same as flying to Sydney, flying into Nandi.
Absolutely.
Certainly a paradise, lovely place to do business, lovely people, a cost advantage for sure. But beyond cost, you've got all the fantastic buller culture, which is so important. I know one of the companies that's based up, the BPO operators, does debt recovery, which has got to be one of the hardest calls to put in, right? Following people up, chasing the money. If you have a friendly Fijian voice on the end of the line, instantly you're sort of building up the rapport, and an Australian or a New Zealand citizen will go, oh, you're coming from Fiji, you're not in India, you're not in Philippines. There's that resonance, and that, and people, they'll start talking about the last holiday, or I went last year, or I want to go next year to Fiji for a holiday. So I think it's all these things. But, sorry, that was a long-winded sort of way of getting to it. I guess given COVID and that companies particular looking at recalibrating, maybe we need to not put all eggs in one basket, i.e. China, or in call centers, India or Philippines. Are you seeing sort of interest from your clients in terms of what's going on in Fiji?
Yeah, there definitely has been an increase in the amount of interest coming through to Fiji because of that. And companies are looking to manage risk by, not moving the entire operation out of the Philippines or India, but having a smaller setup in Fiji to enable them to manage their risk effectively. And it's not only because of COVID, there's cyclones, etc. But COVID definitely has brought this to the forefront of most businesses.
And that's a good point that Carol touched on there. I think for the listeners, the audience today is the fact that Fiji can do smaller. They have a nimble sort of operation, can't you, Carol? So some of the players can work on quite bespoke client delivery, whether it's for a certain project or something for a certain period, and there's opportunities there as well.
That's right. Especially when you're looking at overflow, we can very quickly add people to the operation to take care of disruptions or overflow requirements.
Right. Okay, I think that's probably the end of all the questions. Unless anyone else has got a question, you'll have to quickly submit it, but we're probably going to wrap things up. I'd just like to say thank you very much for Carol and Alan. Alan calling in late. It's on midnight now in Cape Town. So thank you very much.
No problem, you're welcome.
Really appreciate it. You can go and get some rest now.
Yes.
And yeah, just in summary, we've had over sort of 50 people on the call today, which is testament to the interest in what's going on up in Fiji. And as I say, it's still undeveloped, untouched in a lot of regard. People aren't aware that there's this thriving sort of sector and developing sector in Fiji. So we really want to shine a spotlight on that. We will share all these slides of Alan and Carol's today, which will have their contact details. And if you've got any questions, the Fiji Trade Commission here are here to help answer those. And we'd be happy to help facilitate any questions you may have, which I'm sure people have lots of other questions offline about the nuts and bolts and how do we set up an operation up there, or how do we outsource to an existing player. So again, thank you, Alan. Thank you, Carol. Thank you for everyone listening in today. And we look forward to continuing the conversation after this webinar.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me. Enjoyed being part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Carol. Yes. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
And you. Thanks. Bye-bye now.